The text message came in at exactly 2:16 p.m., right as I was helping Mrs. Dandridge pick out a cashmere scarf for her niece's birthday. It was one of those quiet afternoons at the boutique, the kind where the lighting is soft, jazz hums low, in the background, and you can almost forget the world exists beyond the glass windows. I didn't hear the ding. I felt the vibration. I reached into my apron pocket, expecting a shipping update or a discount alert from one of the fabric suppliers. Instead, I saw his name, Daniel, followed by a preview of the message that knocked the breath right out of my lungs without so much as a sound. "I'm leaving you. I'm flying to Miami tonight with Elise. Don't try to reach me. I've already cleaned out the joint account. Enjoy the scarves." Mrs. Dandridge was holding up two options, a silver gray and a soft lilac, and she asked, ever so gently, "Which one feels more Paris in the fall?" And I smiled. I actually smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I had spent the last 6 months preparing for exactly this moment. "The lilac," I told her. "Definitely lilac." She nodded in approval, completely unaware that the 38-year-old woman folding silk tissue paper in front of her had just been dumped, robbed, and publicly humiliated all in the span of a sentence and a half. The only giveaway was a slight tightening around my eyes. You see, this wasn't just a breakup. It was Daniel's grand finale, his mic drop, his big exit from what he liked to call a marriage full of dead air. But here's the thing. Daniel thought I'd crumble. He thought I'd weep in the stockroom and beg him to come home, that I'd grovel, question myself, lose my grip on reality. What he didn't know was that I had already moved on, just not geographically. The door chimed as Mrs. Dandridge left, scarf boxed, bowed, and paid for. I flipped the sign to "closed" and locked the door. Not in panic, not in heartbreak, but in execution, because I had a plan. And Daniel, he just set it into motion for me. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, I would have read that message and collapsed to the floor. But by the time Daniel finally hit send, I'd already buried the illusion that we still had a marriage worth saving. It didn't start with an affair. It started with whispers, tiny signs, barely there, but enough to set off quiet alarms in the corners of my mind. He started going to the gym more, after 15 years of saying exercise was for people with unresolved childhood trauma. Suddenly, he was lifting weights and wearing muscle shirts 2 sizes too small, flexing in the mirror like a teenager. Then came the cologne, sharp, expensive, unfamiliar. The kind that clung to his skin long after he'd left the room. He said it was a gift from a client. He said a lot of things. And his phone? Passwords changed, always face down, always on silent, always within reach. 1 night. I opened our bank app out of habit, intending to pay the utility bill. That's when I noticed a $486 charge to a rooftop bar in Manhattan. On a Tuesday night. He had told me he was working late at the office. I didn't confront him. Instead, I opened a new account under my maiden name. Quietly, carefully, I began rerouting every bit of income from my boutique to that account. Every commission, every return, every cash sale. I even started depositing loose tips from customers who insisted on just a little something extra for the service. It added up faster than I thought. I left the joint account untouched, except for the regular deposits Daniel expected to see. I didn't want him suspicious. I wanted him comfortable. When he suggested we consolidate our finances for simplicity, I agreed with a smile. I played the part so well, I almost believed it myself. Meanwhile, I catalogued everything. Every late night, every lie, every suspicious charge. I took screenshots, printed statements, organized emails by date and keyword. And when I discovered the hotel reservation confirmation for Daniel and Elise, nestled in the trash folder of our shared computer, I didn't cry. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer. She was thorough, strategic, and a little amused when I showed her the message Daniel had accidentally sent to me instead of his mistress, outlining how he planned to take everything and leave Claire wondering what the hell happened. "Well," she said, clicking her pen, "we'll see about that." Daniel thought he was playing chess. He didn't realize I'd already flipped the board. The second text came exactly 2 hours later. "Don't bother begging. Elise and I are flying out tonight. I'll send someone to grab my stuff next week." No punctuation, no warmth, just arrogance wrapped in poor grammar. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into the back office of the boutique, closed the door, and opened the folder labeled Exit Strategy on my laptop. Inside was everything: bank documents, legal drafts, a list of personal and business assets, and a folder named For Court Use Only. Daniel had made this personal, but I was going to make it professional. The first call I made was to the credit card company. "Hi, yes, I'd like to report fraudulent use on my joint account." No, not stolen. Misused by the account holder. I can send documentation, including screenshots where he admits to spending on someone else while using our shared funds. Pause. Yes, I'd also like to freeze the card immediately and cancel the authorized user, Daniel Whitmore. Next, I called the airline. 2 tickets booked today to Miami under the names Daniel Whitmore and Elise Morano. I'd like to contest that charge as unauthorized. Yes, I have evidence of marital fraud. No, I'm not joking. By the time I hung up, Daniel's tropical escape was unraveling at 30,000 feet before it even began. That night, I filed the divorce papers, 3 months ahead of Daniel's script. I also sent a certified letter to his office, informing him that, due to misuse of funds, a temporary freeze had been placed on all joint property negotiations. And then came the cherry on top, a cease and desist letter delivered to his parents. Home, because I knew Barbara, and I knew she'd call me. She did. "Claire, sweetheart, we heard what happened. Daniel says you've been unstable lately, controlling, emotional. Elise just wants peace for him." I took a breath. "Barbara, would you like me to forward the screenshots of your son's unstable messages? Or should I just read them aloud over Sunday brunch?" Silence. "I didn't think so. Tell Daniel the boutique he used to mock as my little scarf shop now has a lawyer sharper than his jawline. And no, he won't be getting a key." I hung up calmly. Outside the shop window, the sky was turning a deep, velvety blue. I flipped the lights off, checked the lock one more time, and stood in the silence. Daniel had tried to disappear with my money and my dignity, but he forgot something very important. You don't underestimate a woman who's been quiet for too long. The court hearing was set for the following Thursday. Just enough time for Daniel to try and fail to get his story straight. He showed up in a navy blazer that looked like it had been borrowed from a younger cousin, and jeans that screamed midlife crisis louder than any therapist ever could. Elise didn't come inside. She waited outside the courthouse, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, scrolling her phone like she wasn't about to watch a man self-destruct. My attorney, Linda, was precise, calm, surgical. She presented a timeline of bank statements, screenshots of Daniel's messages, and a meticulous breakdown of the boutique's earnings, just to make sure the court understood exactly what he hadn't contributed to. Daniel tried to argue that the funds he withdrew were technically his, too. Linda leaned forward. Your Honor, these were personal funds. Claire transferred into a separate account after discovering her husband's infidelity. She allowed a portion to remain in the joint account for appearances, which Mr. Whitmore then drained. Without consent, and in writing he boasted about it. The judge didn't even blink. The court rules in favor of Ms. Whitmore. The respondent is ordered to repay the full amount within 90 days and relinquish any claim to Ms. Whitmore's business and future earnings. Daniel stood up like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But that money's gone. We used it to book flights, to pay for the hotel. The judge cut in. Then I suggest you find a way to replace it, Mr. Whitmore. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Outside, as I stepped into the sun, Daniel caught up with me. His voice was low, urgent. You really went for the throat, didn't you? You couldn't just let me go? I turned slowly. You left with a text, Daniel. You emptied our account with a laugh. You tried to ruin me. He narrowed his eyes. You've humiliated me. I gave him a soft, measured smile. No, Daniel. You humiliated yourself. I just made sure it was documented. 6 months passed. The boutique expanded to a second location across town. A sunlit corner store with tall windows, hardwood floors, and shelves lined with silk, cashmere, and quiet victory. We doubled our staff, launched an online shop, and one of our hand-dyed scarves ended up in a national fashion blog. Orders poured in from places I'd never even visited. Seattle, Austin, even London. I no longer opened the store with shaky hands. I didn't flinch when couples walked in holding hands. I didn't wonder if they were living a lie. I had stopped checking Daniel's social media long ago. But the universe has a way of handing you updates when you least expect them. It came from Melissa, the Elise of it all. She walked into my boutique on a Tuesday afternoon, alone, holding a to-go coffee and a tote bag from a discount department store. She looked thinner, tired. Her hair was a little duller, her posture a little defeated. For a moment, she just stood at the door like she wasn't sure if she should be there. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, she said. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't know, she continued. I mean, I knew some things, but I thought you were cold, controlling. That's how he described you. Said you didn't support his dreams, that you didn't believe in him. She laughed bitterly. After 2 weeks of him criticizing the way I folded towels and suggesting I borrow money from my sister for a new apartment, I realized the truth. You weren't the problem. He is. I nodded. Not smug. Just done. I don't hate you, Melissa, I said. But you weren't innocent either. You knew he was married. Her eyes filled just a little. She nodded. I thought he'd love me better. Turns out he just needed someone else to blame. She left quietly, and I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. 3 months later, I stood behind a podium at the annual Women in Business conference, facing a ballroom full of strangers who had come to hear one thing: how I survived and thrived after being blindsided by betrayal. I adjusted the mic, smoothed my blazer, and smiled. My name is Claire Whitmore, I began. 2 years ago, my husband left me via text. He cleaned out our joint bank account, ran off with someone half my age, and assumed I would crumble. That I'd cry, beg, or disappear quietly. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. Some shook their heads, others leaned forward. But instead of falling apart, I filed paperwork. I consulted a lawyer. And then I built something. Laughter, applause, the good kind. After the talk, a woman in her early 40s approached me, her eyes wide and uncertain. "My husband says I'm paranoid for wanting to keep our finances separate," she whispered. "That marriage means trusting each other." I nodded slowly. My ex said the same thing, right before he tried to claim half my business in the divorce. She blinked. I placed a gentle hand on her arm. Protecting yourself isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. Later that night, back at my office, I looked at the framed print hanging above my desk. It was a screenshot. The message that started it all. "I'm leaving you. Off to Miami with someone who makes me feel alive. P.S. I drained the account. LOL." Below it, in simple gold lettering, a plaque read, "Success is the best revenge." I leaned back in my chair, watching the evening light stretch across the boutique floor, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped needing to prove anything. I was whole. I was healed. And I had done it all on my own terms. Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence. Sometimes the best answer is success. Claire didn't scream. She didn't chase. She simply walked forward, one smart move at a time, until she built a life that made his betrayal irrelevant. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever been underestimated, left behind, or forced to start over when someone else thought they'd broken you, know this: you are not alone, and your next chapter might just be the most powerful one yet. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed and came out stronger? What would your quiet revenge look like? And if you love this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories, so you never miss a moment of strength, strategy, and stunning comebacks. Your story matters, and your voice belongs here.